Hey folks, RJ Beam here with my first book recommendation on my premeditated fiction channel, and that will be Lee Child's newest adventure in the Jack Reacher series of thrillers, The Midnight Line. And if you have never read a Jack Reacher novel before, don't worry, you can pick up this book and read it without any difficulties. Jack Reacher, for folks who are not familiar with him, is a character who is a former U.S. Army major. He had been a military police officer. Prior to being a MP, his dad had been a Marine, and so Jack grew up living on military bases all over the world. I believe the mythology of Jack Reacher is the fact that he had never really spent any time on American soil except for the 4 years he went to college at West Point Military Academy. And so he had spent pretty much his whole adult life living overseas on military bases. And so when he finally retired from the military at the rank of major, he came home and he realized, he's never seen America. He's spent all this time serving his country, but he's never seen it. So he basically just kind of, went to the bus depot with the money in his pocket, jumped on the bus and rode to wherever it went. And he visited that city. When he got tired of that city, he went to the bus depot and did that again and again and again. And so that sets out, quote unquote, the rules as it relates to Mr. Reacher and what he's doing. That he's just traveling the country with the money in his pocket, and he's got a bank account. Obviously, he's retired, so his retirement check is going off to a bank account somewhere, direct deposit, and he can hit up ATM machines and get cash, and he just wanders the country. And of course, because he's the main character in a series of thrillers, he is going to, of course, bumble into some different misadventures from time to time. So this particular one, the story is called The Midnight Line, and in this book, it starts off where Jack Reacher is in Wisconsin, and he decides, he's done with the city of Milwaukee where he was at, and he gets on a bus, and of course, it's the first bus leaving town, so he ends up going to northern Wisconsin. And as he's making a stop along the way, he stops, for a bathroom break, or the bus stops for a bathroom break. And he's wandering around some random town, middle Wisconsin, and he happens to look in the window of a pawn shop, and there is a class ring for a female West Point graduate, 2005. And he takes a look at the ring, and he basically realizes this is not something the average West Point graduate would go and pawn. There has to be some story to this, which of course causes him to buy the ring and kicks off an adventure of trying to figure out where the person who owns this ring is, because West Point graduates don't just pawn off their rings. Of course, his investigation leads him out of the state of Wisconsin over to the Dakotas and Wyoming, where he gets involved in a little bit of heroin and some fentanyl, which is very timely. Actually, Lee Child has done a great job actually of bringing a current topic issue right into light, where you've got all these folks who are involved in the trade of drugs, particularly heroin and fentanyl, which are strong opiates, pain suppressants that many folks can become addicted to, and we have seen some spikes with our veterans in addiction to these because of injuries they've suffered. So Jack Reacher, he's out and about, and he's got a couple different misadventures as it relates to finding one step of the way of, where did this ring come from? Well, it came from one person who then gives him another person who gives him another person. And, he's basically working through the supply chain and eventually, is trying to work his way back. Throughout his adventures, too, he bumbles into a FBI agent who is retired, who is searching for a missing woman. And so they realize that there is some parallels to their investigation, especially when we start getting the drugs involved. So they end up teaming up and working together for a while, which is a pretty common thing in some of the Jack Reacher stories. He seems to team up with the FBI or major police departments, on a regular basis in some of these different books. So it's not that unheard of for the guy who's kind of presented as this lone wolf to team up with somebody else. And overall, it really works out quite well. And I got to say, this was a fun book to read. It was timely, especially again the whole idea of the heroin and the fentanyl, where you're sitting there and thinking, these are some problems that we're having. And so, Lee Child did a really good job of bringing this to light, especially why some of these people get addicted, and why it becomes the problem that it is. The writing is pretty good. Lee Child's got kind of an interesting voice. This is one of those stories. Every Jack Reacher is a little different. Sometimes they're first person, sometimes they're third person. This one is done in the third person. And, Jack Reacher is the primary point of view character, but he does actually jump into, there's a couple of chapters where, there's a police officer in this small town where we're kind of following her. She's kind of got a little side plot that is part of the story. And then there's one of the bad guys, one of the drug dealers. There's a chapter where you spend some time from his point of view, and so it bounces around a little bit as it relates to who the point of view character is. But that makes the story tighter because you get to know a little bit about what's going on in the background, which then kind of makes you wonder, okay, so they're setting a trap for Reacher here. How's he going to get out of this? Or you realize that, okay, they're setting the stage to misdirect Reacher. How is he going to overcome this issue? Which, really makes a page turner just that much more of a page turner, because, when everything is through the hero's eyes, you're doling out the little bit of information in a mystery. And so you're sitting there trying to figure out the clues, which is fun on its own. But for me, sometimes it's more fun when I know a little bit about what's going on with the bad guys. And as an author myself, I oftentimes find writing the bad guys is more fun. So, some of the details and some of the thought processes that the bad guys in this book have, the drug dealers, why they're doing what they're doing, or what it is that they're doing, is actually kind of interesting. And you start looking at, the hows and the whys, and the backgrounds of what they were doing and their mindsets. It becomes quite interesting. And even you have one particular drug dealer who's he's reading business magazines and business articles so that he can become a better businessman, even though he's not working a quote unquote legitimate business. He's a drug dealer. So it was a really fun read when you're reading those sections of the book, and not that the parts with Jack Reacher himself are not fun, but just some of those other little nuanced details of what the mindset of somebody knowingly committing crime is. So, if you've never read the Jack Reacher books before, not a problem. You can pick this one up, read it, and you will understand exactly. Lee Child does a good job of introducing Reacher, and he sprinkles in a few little details throughout the book so you understand what Reacher's backstory is. If you've read the previous books or you've only read a couple select few, you can jump right in this one. You'll enjoy it. I've not read every single Reacher book. I've probably read a little over half of them or so, and definitely was a fun read. And if you've seen the Reacher movies with Tom Cruise, you got to read the books. Seriously, if you're watching those movies, you got to read these books. I mean, I enjoyed the movies as standalone movies. What they're bearing on in the books and the story is close, but not close enough. I mean, let's face it, in the books, Jack Reacher's like 6'5", 200 and some pounds. And Tom Cruise, not quite that tall. Definitely not that big. So, Tom Cruise he's a good Reacher, but he doesn't match the descriptions in the books. And so if you've seen those movies and you enjoy them, you will love these books. They are great reads. They are hard to put down, and they are just fun. The Midnight Line is started off really solid, and it stays solid the whole way through. And I enjoyed reading it. I do have to say, a free copy of The Midnight Line was given to me by the publisher via the NetGalley system. So this was a advanced reader copy that I received digitally for this unbiased review. And so if you're interested, you can go pick it up wherever books are sold. Again, RJ Beam here with Premeditated Fiction, and this was my first BookTube review of Lee Child's The Midnight Line, which is a Jack Reacher thriller. Hope you enjoy it.